Before dawn, in a stone-floored bakehouse somewhere in the back streets of Whitechapel, a man stands barefoot in a wooden trough. His trousers are rolled to the knee. He is treading a mass of dough the size of a small calf. The air is thick enough to chew. Flour dust hangs like a low fog in the lamplight, settling on his eyelashes, his shoulders, the rim of his cup of cold tea. His feet are blackened. His arms up to the elbow are pale with paste. He has been working since 11 o'clock the night before. He will not finish until 2 o'clock the following afternoon. He earns about 15 shillings a week, and the loaf he is making, that soft, sour, faintly grey loaf, will feed a family of 6 for a single day and no more. This is the bread of Victorian Britain, and almost nothing you have been told about it is the whole truth. Over the next quarter of an hour, you will walk the long road of a single Victorian loaf. From the chalky soil of a Hampshire wheat field to the iron ovens of a London cellar, through the hands of harvesters and gleaners and millers and night bakers, past the chemists who poisoned it and the housewives who rescued it. You will meet the women who stooped for 10 hours in stubble to gather what the farmer left behind. You will learn why a hungry man in 1846 could riot for a 4-pound loaf, and why his great-grandson in 1900 would never taste the same bread again. So settle in. Subscribe to The Forgotten Harvest if these stories matter to you, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you are listening from tonight. I read everyone, and I am always astonished at how far these whispers travel. To understand Victorian bread, you must first stand in a Victorian wheat field. Picture the open country of southern England in early August, somewhere on the chalk downs of Wiltshire, or the heavy clay of Suffolk, or the gentle slopes above the Vale of Evesham. The wheat is the old kind, tall, slender, easily flattened by rain. Varieties with names like Squarehead and Red Lammers and Chidham White. It stands waist-high to a child and shoulder-high to a stooping man. There are no combine harvesters. There will not be for another 60 years. The whole crop must come in by hand, and the hands that bring it in belong to 2 very different worlds. In the big house on the hill, the squire sits down to breakfast at 9. There is white bread, fresh that morning, sliced thin. There is butter from his own dairy, cold from the pantry. There is honey in a cut-glass dish, and tea from a sam, and a silver pot of cream. The bread is so pale it almost glows. In the cottage at the foot of the hill, the labourer's wife has been awake since 5. She fetches water from the village pump. She lights the fire. On the deal table sits half a loaf of dark, heavy bread, 3 days old, wrapped in a clean cloth. She slices it thin and softens it in hot water and a scrape of lard. This is breakfast for 7 children, 2 tables, 2 loaves, 1 island. The household at the cottage door is large by our standards. 7 or 8 children is unremarkable. There is no shop loaf here. There is no money for it. There is flour, water, salt, a knob of balm from the village brewer if she is fortunate, and the small black oven set into the wall beside the hearth. She bakes once a week, sometimes once a fortnight. The loaves are wrapped in clean linen and laid in a wooden chest where they grow steadily harder. By Friday the bread must be sliced thin and softened in hot water and lard. This is not a picturesque object. It is a careful arithmetic of hunger. And the hunger is real. The population of these islands doubles within the Queen's long reign, from roughly 18 million souls at her accession to over 41 million by the year 1901. Every one of them must be fed, so follow the harvest itself. The labourer's day begins at 4 in the morning when the corn is ripe. He carries a scythe with a wooden cradle attached, or if he is older, a sickle of curved steel that has not changed its shape in 1,000 years. He works in a gang of 5 or 6 men, moving across the field in a slow diagonal sweep, the wheat falling neatly to his left. Behind him come the women and the older children. They gather the cut stalks into sheaves. They bind them with a twist of straw. They stand them upright in stooks of 8 or 10 to dry in the sun. A skilled scytheman could cut an acre a day. He was paid in the 1850s somewhere between 2 shillings and 2 shillings and sixpence for that acre. By harvest's end, working from first light until last, he might bring home £5, and that one fortnight's money would have to stretch into the lean months ahead. The hours are brutal. 14, sometimes 16 hours of stooping, swinging, lifting. The hands blister, then callous, then split. The back never quite straightens again. The women carry the youngest baby strapped to their chest while they bind sheaves. The older children of 7 and 8 run errands, fetch beer in stoneware jars, drive the horses on the binding cart. There is a hierarchy within the gang as strict as any drawing room. The Lord of the Harvest is elected from among the men, the most skilled scytheman, often the eldest. He sets the pace. He names the moment for the brief meal of bread and cheese and small beer taken under the hedge. He decides when the day is done. To cross him is to find yourself working alone the following year. And then, when the last sheaf is bound and the last stook standing, comes the moment that defines this story. The farmer rides out across his cleared field. He inspects the stubble, and he gives the sign that opens the gates to the gleaners. Gleaning, the forgotten harvest. The word has almost vanished from English now, but for centuries it was as much a part of August as the swallows. The right to glean, to gather by hand the ears of wheat that had fallen during the cutting and binding, was an ancient one. It was written into the Old Testament and grafted onto English custom by the unwritten law of the village. After the farmer's crop was safely carted away, the poor of the parish were permitted to enter the field and take what remained. A church bell in many villages rang to announce the opening of the gleaning. Another bell rang at sundown to close it. The gleaners were almost entirely women and children. They worked in a long line, bent double, their aprons gathered up into pouches, their fingers picking at the stubble for every fallen grain. A determined woman with 3 or 4 children at her side could gather, over the gleaning season of 3 or 4 weeks, enough wheat to make perhaps 2 bushels of flour. That flour, ground at the village mill in exchange for 1/10 of the grain, would yield around 40 or 50 loaves. For a labouring family, gleaning was not a quaint custom. It was the difference between eating bread through the winter and going without. But the custom was already dying as the Queen came to the throne. In 1788, a notorious court case, Steele against Houghton, had ruled that gleaning was not, in fact, a legal right under common law. The fields belonged to the farmer. The fallen grain belonged to the farmer. The poor could be turned away. Many were. As the century wore on, the new mechanical reapers, drawn by horses and patented in America by Cyrus McCormick in 1834, and later by Obed Hussey, swept the fields cleaner. There was less to glean. The bells stopped ringing in one parish, then another. By 1890, in most of England, the gleaning bell had fallen silent for good. And then came the mills. The wheat now leaves the field for the mill. For most of the Queen's reign, this is still the old place. A watermill on the river or a windmill on the hill, its great wooden sails creaking against the sky. The miller is a figure of suspicion in every English village. He is the subject of 1,000 jokes about light thumbs on heavy scales. He charges a toll, usually 1/16 of the grain he grinds, and he keeps the bran and the offals for his pigs. The flour that emerges is wholemeal, the entire grain, the bran, the germ, the endosperm, all together. It is heavy. It is dark. It is, by every measure of modern nutrition, magnificent. And the Victorian poor ate it because they had no choice. The Victorian rich, of course, wanted white. They had always wanted white. White bread, since the Middle Ages, had been the bread of the gentleman. Brown bread, the bread of the labourer. Now the Industrial Revolution made this old prejudice into a new science. From the 1840s onward, the steel roller mill, perfected first in Hungary, then imported to Britain, began to replace the millstone. The rollers crushed the grain, then sifted out the bran and the germ, leaving only the pale, starchy endosperm. The bread was whiter than any peasant had ever seen. It was also stripped of its iron, its B vitamins, its fiber, and most of its fat. The rich grew taller. The poor, who could now afford the cheaper white loaf, grew weaker and worse. Bakers, squeezed by the price of flour and the competition of the cities, learned to stretch their dough. They added alum, a mineral salt, to whiten the crumb and bind extra water. They added chalk, plaster of Paris, dried bones from the knacker's yard. Even, in the most appalling cases, white lead. In the 1820s, a young German chemist named Friedrich Accum had first sounded the alarm. A generation later, the campaigning physician Arthur Hill Hassell examined loaves bought across London and found adulteration so widespread that scarcely a single sample was pure. Hassell published his findings in The Lancet. The scandal was immense. It led eventually to the Adulteration of Food Acts of the 1860s and 70s, among the first consumer protection laws in any country in the world. If you have ever wondered why we have food labels at all, the answer begins in a Victorian bakehouse, with a chemist and a microscope and a loaf of poisoned bread. This is the world the forgotten harvest exists to remember. If you have stayed with me this far, please do consider subscribing. And if there is a forgotten craft or tradition you would like told next, leave its name in the comments. Your suggestions shape every almanac I write. Yet hunger has a longer memory than progress. Beyond the bread itself lay a whole calendar of forgotten ritual. There was Lammas, the 1st of August, when the very first loaf of the new harvest was carried to the parish church and blessed upon the altar, Lammas being a corruption of the Old English hlathmas, the loaf mass. There was the corn dolly, plaited from the last sheaf cut in the field, kept above the hearth all winter to hold the spirit of the corn, and ploughed back into the earth at the spring sowing. There was the harvest home supper, given by the farmer to his men in the great barn, beef and beer and a sung grace. The lord of the harvest seated at the head of the table for one night only, as the equal of his master. There were the wandering Irish harvesters, the spalpeens, who walked from County Mayo to Liverpool and then on foot across the Pennines, sleeping in barns, earning a few pounds to send home, vanishing again before Michaelmas. There were the gypsy families who followed the harvest from Kent to Lincolnshire and back, all of them, gleaners, spalpeens, corn dolly makers, gone within 2 generations. Swept away by the steam threshing machine, the steel mill, the railway loaf delivered already wrapped from the factory in town, and so we return to the bakehouse in Whitechapel where this story began. The man in the trough is, in his own way, a craftsman. His hands know the dough as a violinist's hands know a fingerboard. He can tell by the smell of the balm whether the rise will be slow or fast, whether the morning's loaves will be tight-crumbed or open. He has never written any of this down. He could not if he tried. He learned it from his father, who learned it from his father in an unbroken chain stretching back to the Saxon ovens of the dark wood villages. By the year 1900, his trade is dying. The aerated bread company, founded in 1862 by a doctor named John Douglas, now produces bread by injecting carbon dioxide directly into the dough. No yeast, no waiting, no hands. The Chorleywood process, which would finish the work, lay only 61 years in the future. So the next time you tear a piece of bread at your table tonight, hold it a moment before you eat. Feel its weight. Smell its crust. Somewhere in that small, soft thing is the field at 4 in the morning, and the woman bent in the stubble with her apron full of grain, and the bell that called her in at sundown, and the boy treading dough in the dark cellar, and the chemist with his microscope, and the corn dolly above the hearth. They are all still there. They are what bread remembers, even when we have forgotten. If this almanac moved you, share it with someone who would listen. Tell me below which forgotten craft or tradition you would like me to walk next. The village blacksmith, the wool comber, the lace maker by candlelight, the carter on the old drove roads. I am listening, as always. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers of the harvest.